Today we're going to be looking at two philosophies of life, and we've kind of already hinted at them throughout some of the lectures in this course. And these are not the only philosophies of life that we've looked at, actually. We've looked at arguably at least two since the beginning of class. Both of them were to be found within our ethics unit. What we've been investigating in this unit is how to think about life and how to live. This is perhaps one of the most important questions you ever have to ask yourself. What am I supposed to think about all this? How am I supposed to live? What kind of life is going to allow me to be fulfilled, to die without too many regrets, to get what I want out of life? These are questions that humans have been wrestling with for thousands of years. And some of the smart ones have come up with, I think, good answers to this question. Although we're going to disagree on whether or not we all think that they're good or useful. One way that you can live is by trying to be the most moral person you can be. A lot of people find some solace and security in pursuing what we might call a life of virtue. This is the kind of life that Immanuel Kant kind of implicitly encourages us to follow. His whole notion of morality and universality is trying to push us to pursue those lives that prioritize doing what's right over everything else, even at the expense of our own happiness. And this is something you'll hear a lot of people say nowadays. They'll say, I care about doing what's right. I don't care if that comes at a cost to me. I want to be a good person. So that's one way that you could live. You could try to cultivate some sort of security and comfort in the face of all this craziness by following some sort of moral principle. But there are other ways to live too, right? If Susan Wolf is to be believed, trying to always do the morally right thing is not going to allow you to build a fulfilling life for yourself. Because she worries that the moral saint is somebody who is not going to develop a well-rounded moral character. They're going to be a goody two-shoes. Nobody's going to want to really hang out with them. They're not going to be fun. So, we have good reason to believe that maybe trying to be the best moral person in the universe is not something that we should seek out or strive after. Maybe, and this is something that y'all probably intuitively agree with a little bit, maybe the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to pursue our own happiness. This is kind of what Aristotle argued, right? His philosophy of life was, look, there are certain ways that you work and think because of the kind of thing that you are. You're a human. There are going to be certain things that are good for you. You should pursue those things. You should try to do human stuff excellently. Become the best human that you can be. Because if you do that, if you become smart and wise and good and prudent and all these different things, you'll be able to achieve happiness. A fulfilling life, eudaimonia, right? Human flourishing. So far, we've seen two philosophies of life. One that prioritizes what we might call morality or virtue, and another one which says we should seek after happiness or eudaimonia. Well, the rest of the class meetings that we're going to have are going to be outlining some additional philosophies of life. one of the thinkers that we're going to be looking at today is squarely within the ancient tradition of which Aristotle is also a part. More specifically, we're going to be looking at two philosophies of life today that are very similar to one another, but have important fundamental differences. And to do that, we're going to investigate the philosophy of Epicurus, who was an ancient Greek philosopher who started his own community in Athens. I believe it was called the Garden, where people could converse and eat and live together and pursue this same overarching goal. So one of the philosophies of life that we're going to be looking at today is known as Epicureanism. Epicureanism is an offshoot of Greek philosophy that, to give you some historical context, the philosophy of Plato and Socrates was something that was beginning to get a foothold in the ancient Greek world. But after the Romans conquered the Greeks, this kind of school, if you could call it that, split into three branches of philosophy. Epicureanism is one of these branches. The other two being Stoicism and what we might call skepticism. Obviously, skepticism was concerned with asking questions about the nature of the universe, not merely taking the Homeric Greek tradition or the Platonic school of thought for granted, but critiquing them a little bit. Some of these skeptics believe that humans simply don't have the ability or the knowledge in order to really cultivate a complete understanding of the world. In contrast to that branch, we have Stoicism and Epicureanism, which we could say are both philosophies of life in their own right. Stoicism is something that's actually seeing something of a resurgence today. It's a philosophy of life that's based on cultivating self-discipline and self-mastery, control over our emotions so that we can do our duty, think and behave rationally, because they argue this is going to be the best way for us to live and achieve our goals. So it's going to privilege rational thought and analysis, control over our emotions, and in some sense, something similar to what Aristotle was arguing for, which is self-mastery and the betterment of ourselves, trying to become the best version of ourselves that we can be. Stoicism encourages a kind of seriousness insofar as we try to become better versions of ourselves, insofar as we try to look at the world objectively and rationally, but also a kind of hardness with respect to the experiences and the trials and the tribulations that we have. The archetypical Stoic person, Marcus Aurelius, for example, who was a former emperor of the Roman Empire, was somebody who looked life in the face, did not bow to temptation, strongly resisted vice and temptation, and soldiered on. It's a great philosophy for the kinds of people and lifestyle that the Romans were trying to cultivate that sought glory and honor, victory on the battlefield. Epicureanism is a little bit different than that. It's a philosophy of life that does not necessarily encourage us trying to become the best versions of ourselves or being hard-hearted, cold, and rational. Not seeing reason or goodness as the highest good, but instead a form of pleasure. Epicureanism is going to say, if we want to live fulfilled lives, what we need to do is pursue a kind of pleasurable existence. It's a kind of nuanced hedonism, we might say. Does anybody know what hedonism is? Is this a word you've heard before? Hedonism? Yeah.
I've heard it before, but the only thing I can think about is the hedonistic trend where you spike up and then you go back to baseline, you go down and you go back to baseline. I can't remember what hedonism actually is, but I kind of know of it.
It has to do with pleasure, right? Somebody who advocates for a hedonistic lifestyle is going to say things like, look, you should pursue pleasure. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll in some sense. Okay? Because that stuff feels good. Makes your body feel nice. It makes your brain feel nice. Basically, it's a philosophy of life which argues that the fulfilling life is one that seeks after pleasure and the satisfaction of our own desires. So hedonists are going to say, do you want to live a fulfilling life? Satisfy your desires. Seek after pleasurable things. Nice pillows, comfortable beds, good drugs, good sex, that kind of stuff. It takes pleasure to be the highest good. So somebody who's leading a hedonistic lifestyle is going to be somebody who's concerned with satisfying their own desires for food, for drink, for fun, for escape, for entertainment, all of these different things. Due to the kinds of technologies that we have nowadays, this is a life that a lot of people can pursue quite easily, right? Think of all of the entertainment you have available to you, right? All of the luxuries. The nice pillows and blankets and drugs, music that you can listen to, relationships, fun relationships that you can get into. Instinctively, this is kind of a philosophy of life that a lot of people follow, right? They try to do things that make them feel good. Can you think of any problems with this philosophy of life? Or issues that you might run into if you followed it? I'm not saying you will run into issues, but there are some worries that people have about thinking and living in this way. What might they be? What were to happen if everybody lived like this? Do you think society would be good and ordered and everybody would be happy? Maybe you're worried about a Hobbesian situation, yeah?
Nothing hard would ever get done.
Nothing hard would ever get done. Why does that matter?
Because some hard things are important to making society work.
Okay, such as what?
Well, you're not going to be able to have all your fun entertainment things if there's no electricity, things like that.
Right, yeah. I mean, look, sometimes we got to do things that we don't want to do in order to, go on living, in order to keep the lights on, right? Somebody's got to make sure that the pipes are all fitting together well, that, all the wires are connected properly, that our water systems are good, our sanitation systems. So it doesn't seem like we can always prioritize pleasure above everything else in our lives. Although maybe we could. Maybe you could give the following kind of argument. Like, look, yeah, I'm doing my job in order to get that stuff. Like, I'm delaying gratification so I can get more down the line. I mean, this is how humans work, right? You're sitting in class now. You're devoting all of this time and energy to learning this crap. Why? Well, so you can get a job, so you can take care of yourself and raise a family, whatever, and go on trips, so you can have more pleasure down the line, right? Isn't that why you're here? You wouldn't be here if you didn't think it was at least a little worth it, I hope. Otherwise, I don't know what you're doing. Obviously, there are some more surface level issues too. I mean, think of the people who really lean into like the celebrity, drugs and alcohol and sex lifestyle. Hangovers are a thing, right? I'm sure you've all experienced them. You smoke too much, you can get paranoid. You drink too much, you're not going to feel good the next day. You take too much ecstasy, you're going to get dehydrated. All these different things. So it's easy to go overboard, right? It's easy when you're leaning into pleasure hard to like screw yourself the next day, right? And to just heap more and more pain and suffering on yourself. You're like, oh, why did I go to Tequila Cowboys last night? I'm so hungover. My stomach hurts. I can't stop throwing up. So this is a desirable way to live for a lot of people. But if you lean into doing some of these hedonistic activities too hard, it can bite you in the butt, right? Epicurus noticed this, and he weaved it into his own philosophy, his own way of life. We might call this way of life, as I said before, a more nuanced form of hedonism. But it's one that doesn't seek after pleasure and the satisfaction of desire generally. It's a way of life that says, you know what y'all should do? Instead of seeking after all these nice feelings and satisfying our desires all the time, you should seek after a life of untroubledness. That's what you should do. Or in the Greek, what's known as ataraxia. So, Epicureanism, we could say, is an ancient philosophy of life, which argues that the fulfilling life is one that seeks after ataraxia, or untroubledness. Because it's going to notice, like, look, if you lean too hard into the drugs and the sex and the alcohol, you're just going to heap more suffering on yourself. Like, you need to take kind of a moderate view of these things and engage in kind of a moderate lifestyle in order to prevent more pain and suffering for yourself down the line. More specifically, Epicurus is going to say there are certain things that we should pursue in order to live a relatively contentful, untroubled life. Things like friends. This is a common theme we saw pop up already, right, with Aristotle. We should try to live a life free of pain and worry as we can. We should try to live a life in community with those that we care about, with those maybe that have similar views, similar goals. We should pay attention to the state and the feelings within our body, and our life should be oriented and focused on the here and now, rather than worried about what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future. Okay? So you might say that Epicurus is kind of encouraging a simple life that seeks after finding contentment in the little things, and the stuff that we tend to take for granted or forget because we're surrounded by them constantly, right? Tasty food, good friends, a good community support network. So he thinks that seeking after pleasure is a good thing. It can help us, it makes us feel good. But what's more important than seeking after pleasure is seeking after untroubledness or contentment. So you might say it's a very down-to-earth philosophy of life, okay? The fulfilled life is not one in which you're constantly planning and worrying about tomorrow. It's not one in which you're focused on your regrets and all the dumb stuff you did as a 6th grader. It's not focused on doing all the drugs that you can, having all the sex that you can, drinking all the alcohol that you can. It's a rather simple way of life. One which encourages a more ascetic lifestyle than a hedonistic lifestyle, I would say. It says that we should try to satiate our natural desires, our things for food and drink, some modicum of comfort. But we should stop chasing after those unnatural desires that we have. Desires that have been socially or artificially conditioned into us. This was something that we saw in Rousseau's philosophy, right? We're filled with all these artificial desires and needs that are causing us to be dicks and lash out at people and preventing our own learning and growth. Yeah, Epicurus agrees. We should not chase after these empty desires, desires that cannot ultimately be fulfilled. such as desires for fame and celebrity and massive wealth and political power. Screw that stuff. No, what you should work on is finding contentment and having a simple meal and having a conversation with your friends and enjoying the weather, sitting outside underneath a nice tree, watching the water flow by. Epicurus encourages a rather simple, natural way of life. In your life, if you chase after these socially conditioned things that you're taught to value, that you're taught are good, you're not really going to be able to secure them. And you can find fulfillment just by, well, cultivating some gratitude and living just a simpler way of life. We shouldn't chase endlessly after pleasure. Rather, what we should do is try to reach a stage of contentment. And we're going to be able to do that if we focus on the simpler pleasures. What this is going to end up looking like for Epicurus is letting go of a lot of the things that we have been socially conditioned into thinking we need and are good for us. Letting go of this desire to control and plan everything, perhaps. But more so, trying to overcome our fear of death. Because this is something that Epicurus thinks is holding a lot of people back. We might say then that Epicureanism has some differing priorities, metaphysics, and orientations than some of the philosophies that we've been looking at so far. In contrast to Stoicism, which is Kantianism, for example, which is going to prioritize reason and a kind of rationalistic, maybe, way of analyzing and understanding the world, Epicureanism is going to be more empiricist in its epistemology. So it's going to say, learn to cultivate and trust your senses. What is your body telling you? Are you relieving it of the stress and anxiety that you feel? It's going to focus on prioritizing earthly matters and earthly things over having our heads in the clouds all the time, or worrying endlessly about what God thinks of us or where we're going to go when we die. Partly because the Epicureans didn't really believe that, they didn't believe in dualism, let's say. Remember, dualism was this view that argued that everything in the universe is made up of either matter or mental stuff, right? Physical stuff or mental stuff. This was the view that Descartes held when he made a distinction between the mind and the body. The Epicureans had what we might call an atomistic metaphysics. They were one of the first groups to come up with this idea that everything that you see around you is actually made up of these fundamental indivisible particles, atoms. This comes from the Greek word atomos, meaning uncuttable. And it's an idea, it's a word that has stuck with us ever since. They believe that this whole universe, this whole world, everything, is just made up of these tiny atoms. Okay? And pockets of empty space, or what we might call voids. They also believe that the universe is infinite. And so what we get with Epicureanism is a rather down-to-earth philosophy. One that encourages us to focus on simple bodily things, to forego this constant worrying and this constant thinking. To try to let go of all these existential and spiritual concerns that we have. Because Epicurus thinks they're not serving a lot of people. And so what he goes over in this piece that I asked you to read for today, Principal Doctrines, are some of the fundamental ideas of Epicureanism. The kind of view that we should take towards death, the kind of way that we should generally live our lives, and what is going to allow us to cultivate some happiness and contentment. I'd like to go over just a few of these, because I think they're incredibly important in order to understand what Epicurus is getting at. Section 2, for example, is critical, which discusses Epicurus' views on death and the kind of attitude that we should take to our own inevitable deaths. Here's what he says in section 2. Death is nothing to us, for the body, when it has been resolved into its elements, has no feeling. And that which has no feeling is nothing to us. What do y'all think he's trying to get at there? What kind of attitude should we take towards death? This is a very interesting argument. Should we be afraid of it? What do you think? What does he say? Should we be afraid of it? Should we worry about it? No. You want to know why? You're never going to experience your own death. What Epicurus is saying here is, look, you should only fear things that you're going to feel. You're not going to feel your own death. You're going to be here one moment, and then the next moment you're going to be gone. You're not going to experience the fizzling out of your consciousness. You're not going to experience the moment you die. And it's something that we can't avoid anyway. It's inevitable. Are you worried endlessly about the eons that you were not in existence before you were born? No, you don't give a thought to that, right? So why would you give a thought to the eons that you're not going to be around for? What sense does that make? Does this fear or anxiety of death serve you at all? No. So he's going to say the majority of people need to really think about this and cultivate a new understanding and view of their own death. Most of our fear and our worry in life comes from this. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid it, trying not to think about it. But he says, look, death is nothing to us. It's nothing to fear because it itself is like the end of all perception and feeling. We're not ever going to really experience death, so what's there to fear about it? Maybe what you're worried about is experiencing some pain, at the end of your life. That's reasonable, But fearing this non-existence doesn't make much sense. And it's not good for you. So, if we can recontextualize our own deaths, if we can reorient ourselves with respect to it, we're going to be able to alleviate a lot of our own fear and anxiety and get more out of this life than we are now. What do you think about this argument? Do you like this view? Does it make sense? What do y'all think? Does it make sense to fear death because you're not actually going to experience it? You're not going to feel it. One moment you're going to be alive perceiving things, then you're just gone. That's it. You're just gone. You won't miss anything. You won't feel any pain because you won't be here. Yeah.
I think some people don't necessarily fear when death happens. I think they may fear missing out on things. I don't know.
Okay.
I think the view makes sense, but I also feel like people don't always worry about, I don't know, just like that itself.
So you said that maybe people have this negative view of death because they don't want to miss out on stuff, and they're going to be missing out on stuff. What kind of stuff are they worried about missing out on?
Maybe I don't know, seeing their family grow, or maybe they wanted to travel to this place. I don't know, I think it all depends on how old they are too.
Okay. So yeah, they want to be around for these experiences with the people that they're close with. Maybe you don't want to die because you want to be able to have a lightsaber. I don't know. Wouldn't that be cool? Or you want to see what the next awesome movies are going to be coming out in the next 30 years? Yeah.
Yeah, I also agree with what she said, but I also think some people worry about what necessarily happens after death. Is there a great beyond? And then with some people may not be set in stone with what they believe, so then they're just scared of inevitably what happens. If anything happens, who knows? Heaven, hell, purgatory, what I don't, there's just so much to think about and what could happen.
So people have disagreements about this, right? Epicurus thinks that, look, when your body dies, there goes your consciousness too. You're not going to be feeling or thinking or perceiving anything. Because all there is this and this and this. But, as we know from, our schooling, from what we hear out there in society, people don't think that the death of the body is the end. Right? Some people think there is an afterlife. That you are going to remain conscious in some sense after the death of your body. Right? Christians believe this. Muslims believe this. Some Eastern religions believe this. This idea that death is not actually the end of your existence. There might be some stuff after that. Oh shit. Like, I don't want to be on the wrong side of that. And they know that death is like, it's the portal to that other place, right? That other state. And they're afraid of what lies beyond. Yeah? Is this a fear that y'all have had or seen in people? Experienced yourself or talked about with other people? Yeah? If you were raised religious in the United States, you probably have thought about this. Right? Yeah, so maybe this argument only works if you do think death is the end. Right? If you think that you are going to go on thinking and feeling after your body dies, then this isn't going to bring you much solace, is it? And then, of course, Epicurus is going to say, what kind of evidence do you have for any of that? Do you have evidence that the gods exist? Do you actually have evidence that there's an afterlife? I don't know. Any other thoughts on this?
I feel like death isn't always as peaceful as he's making it out to be. Dying can be a very painful and scary experience. So in that aspect, I can see why one would fear death.
Yeah, it could be painful. And he would say, it's reasonable to fear pain. That's something you feel that you don't want to feel. That sucks. Yeah, that's reasonable. I think he would say, though, that we put too much stock into that happening, though. Or that maybe that we worry too much about that happening to ourselves. What do you think? Do you worry a lot about pain and suffering? That your own end is going to be painful? Do you have any good evidence that it's going to be like that? Epicurus would say, those are just worries, man. You're just stressing yourself out. That's anxiety. Just work on that a little bit. You'll come to have a better view of things, not have so much fear.
I was gonna say, I don't think it's the actual death that people think is gonna be torturous, after you lose consciousness, for real die.
Yeah.
I think it's that the lead up to death, the dying part of it, that a lot of people fear, because all instinctually don't want to be in pain, but as unfortunate as it is, there is so many things that can kill us that are painful. There's cancer, there's heart attacks, there's a ton of other stuff, being shot or being violently killed or whatever. There's a ton of things that could happen to you at any moment for any reason at all that are painful, and I think just the act of dying is more fearsome than actually dying itself, because rationally we all know that you just stop feeling. Even if you believe that there's a heaven or hell or whatever, which I do, but rationally I know I'm still not gonna feel anything, because there's still a concept that after you die, even if your consciousness lives, there's no physical body for you to feel anything, and there's nothing but good feelings afterwards.
Provided you go to the right place.
Well, yeah.
Right?
Most people like to believe that they would.
Yeah.
So, nobody, I don't think anybody goes into dying being okay, well, I'm just accepting my fate here and now, just gonna go to hell. I think most people try and make an attempt to not do that. But what do I know? I haven't died. So, I don't know, I just think, fear of dying is like what happens to your loved ones after. At
Mm-hmm.
a certain point in your life, you will have experienced death and loss, and that's a very painful and arduous experience in itself.
Sure.
And I think it's also like the fear of like, okay, like how will the people around you react? Because you can't see who goes to your funeral, you can't see who shows up to the hospital.
Yeah.
You're dead. So it's just like, okay, like do these people around me really love me? Will they show up? Will they be hurt by this? And if they are hurt, I don't want them to hurt. So I think it's also like that.
Yeah, people are certainly worried about all that, right? They want people to show up to their funeral because they want people to have liked them and missed them, right? They don't want to cause their loved ones suffering. Does it make sense to worry about any of that? You're not going to be around to see or feel any of it, right? I mean, we care about each other. We don't want to cause each other unnecessary pain, but is worrying about that stuff serving you at all? Could you see yourself not doing that so much and living a more contentful life? This is kind of what Epicurus is trying to get us to consider. We are constantly stretched between the past and the future, worrying and being anxious about stuff that has already happened, that's fixed, and about God knows what's going to happen. Who the hell knows what's going to happen in 20 minutes? Much in a way similar to Eastern philosophies of life, one of which we're going to look at later, Epicurus, I think, is trying to get us to slow down and focus on the real thing that is right before us. The only thing that exists, which is the present moment. We drum up so much pain and suffering for ourselves, living in the past and in the future. But if we just took things as they come, what's there to worry and stress about? Including our own deaths. If things get too bad, why don't you just kill yourself? This is actually something that people in the ancient world thought was a good and noble thing. If you took your own life, that indicates that you're not a coward. Now, I don't know if we want to feel that way about it. You'll have to think about that yourself. But in any case, the point that I think he's trying to get us to realize is how much unnecessary pain and suffering that we heap upon ourselves due to our own thoughts and conceptions about death, the afterlife, God, heaven and hell, all that stuff. So, we can live a more fulfilling life if we work on that. But we can also live a more fulfilling life if we do some certain things. Such as practicing a kind of sober, moderate hedonism. Not one in which you're doing lines in the bathroom every day, but, maybe one in which maybe once a year you're lucky enough to score some Coke. I don't know. Not one in which you're drinking every day and you have a hangover every morning, but maybe one in which, maybe you party on Fridays, but you don't drink too much. You make sure to drink your water or your Pedialyte, whatever it is. A kind of sober, moderate hedonism. Yeah? So not going balls to the wall with the drugs, the sex, and the rock and roll. What do you think? Does this make sense? Does this seem more desirable to you than going all out every day? Raging every day? That sounds exhausting to me. I don't know about you. How does that sound? Sound good? No? Or do you have problems with it? Is this stupid? Is this a stupid way to live? Do you like it? How about this? Yeah, we seek after pleasure if we can. That's nice. We do it responsibly, though, so we don't have to deal with the dehydration and the hangovers and the pounding headaches and the shakes if you drink too much for extended periods of time. How about we seek after just eliminating the pain and suffering from our lives as much as we can? This ataraxia thing that we've been talking about. Epicurus characterizes this as the pleasurable absence of suffering. He says when you're not feeling pain and suffering, you're actually in a kind of pleasurable state. So when you're hungry, you remove the pain of hunger by eating. When you're thirsty, you remove the bad dry throat that you have by drinking water. When you're uncomfortable, you alleviate that by changing the position that you're sitting in or lying in. And then there are things that we can do to make those things even better, like, add some nice pillows onto your bed, or not eat too much at Thanksgiving because you're going to burst and that hurts, right? He says in his philosophy that, yes, suffering sucks, but it is never too much for us to endure. And if we reflect on the suffering in our lives, it never lasts too long. It seems to be a human tendency for us to focus on the bad and the negative and the painful. But Epicurus says, if you're honest with yourself, think of all the times you were in pain. How long did that really last? Like in physical pain, for instance, right? Maybe now and then you'll have like a stabbing pain. You're like, oh, it's the end. And then it just goes away, right? You're like, oh, wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Right? Or, your back hurts for a little while, but then, you get up and start walking and you're fine. Do you agree with him that most of the suffering that we experience is not too much to endure and it doesn't last that long? What do you think? Do we have a tendency to over-exaggerate our pain and suffering to ourselves and others? Maybe it's gotten worse due to the fact that we live such luxurious lifestyles. We have all these artificial needs and desires that we've been discussing, right? God forbid I go without my phone for 5 minutes. Right? I'm freaking out if I can't find it. What do you think? Do you agree with him on this point? Our suffering ain't that bad. We can endure it. It doesn't last too long. Or are you just like, Epicurus, you don't know my life. You don't know what I've been through. Yeah.
I think it all really just depends on the person. Like, they could have a horrible disease, and I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty painful, and it could kill you.
Yeah.
But other person could just, I don't know, fall and scrape their knee, and then their knee heals, now they're better.
Yeah.
So I think it all depends. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Some people are living just terrible existences, right, with a lot of pain and suffering. Those, for example, who suffer from depression for years, decades. Those who suffer from cancer or some other disease or malady, right? What about in your life? Think in your own life personally. Is it filled with a lot of pain and suffering? You don't have to answer, but just think about it. Just reflect on that. And if you find that he is right, maybe that might help you live a more contentful life by taking stock of the kinds of pleasurable and fulfilling experiences that you've had and the ones that are available to you without much effort. Especially if he's right that it's true that living absent suffering and pain is itself kind of a pleasurable state. When you're just hanging out in your bedroom and nothing hurts and you're looking at your phone. Maybe we could find gratitude and joy in that. I don't know. Epicurus doesn't think, though, that just because we should seek after pleasure and the absence of suffering, ataraxia, that we should just do whatever the hell we want, though. Due to the ways that human society is set up, human relationships, the norms and the values that we have, he thinks that what is going to be best for us is living a somewhat ethical and just life. So, at least for our own benefit, if not also for the benefit of others, he thinks that we should try to live a life that is wise and just, if we can. Because if we do stupid things and if we do cruel things, not only is that going to make us feel bad because we have a conscience, but it might cause other people to do things that are going to make us feel bad. Like they might retaliate, or physically, or say mean things to us, or we might get locked up. So in general, it's a good idea to live an ethical and a just life, because that makes us feel good, and that is going to keep us out of trouble. What we get in his philosophy, at least implicitly, is this idea that the pleasurable life is one that is at least somewhat just. We derive pleasure, we derive contentment from doing good things. Do you agree with him on that? Do you feel better when you do good things? Or are you like, screw that nonsense. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. What do you think? Do you derive joy from screwing people over? No? Okay, well that's good. I mean, if you do, you don't have to tell me or anything, but Epicurus is providing something of an analysis of human nature, right, and human psychology here. He's saying, look, for the average person who's going to read this, who's going to listen to this, if you do good things, you're going to feel good. And if you do good things, generally, that'll keep you out of trouble. So people don't do bad things to you. So you don't have pain and suffering heaped on you from external sources. The same thing is true of acquiring some knowledge, of becoming a smarter person. In sections 16 through 21, he says that part of attaining a pleasurable, happy life is learning how the universe works, achieving some sort of knowledge of all this, so that we can best operate within it. So that we can get our stuff done. So that we can meet our goals. So that we can fulfill those desires that we have. Do you agree with him on that? Is it a good idea to learn how all this works for your own sake? As much as you can, let's say. You're never going to be able to know everything, right? Hell, you're not even going to remember 10% of what we've looked at in this class, right? Do you think that a pleasurable life is one in which part of it involves you seeking after knowledge and learning?
I think people find happiness in seeking knowledge, but I think it can also cause anxiety because you can find out things that maybe you didn't want to know about life
Yeah.
or the future.
Can you give an example?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Is there something you're worried about? You're like, oh God, since I learned about this, since I learned about microplastics in people's blood, I can't get it out of my head.
Oh, there probably is something. I can't think of anything right now, but I don't know. Maybe like you don't know the world is gonna catch on fire in a couple 100 years because of us being so horrible at cycling.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah. Ever since I learned about our national debt, I can't stop thinking about societal collapse. Yeah, I mean, knowledge can increase anxiety and stress. But I think you would say that depends on your relationship to that knowledge. Right? Like, look, the fact that we are in debt to ourselves in these different countries doesn't mean that, everything's going to go to shit. Just because food prices have gone up a little bit, that doesn't mean my life is going to be bad or that I have to worry endlessly about stuff, right? You flow with the times, you roll with the punches. Maybe if we could just focus more on the present moment and our present experience, we would alleviate a lot of our own stress. What do you think? Is that a wise thing? Or are you somebody who's like, no, I need to plan, I need to think, I need to have control? This is something that's going to pop up again when we look at Taoism, which is a very different way of thinking and being that we are used to in the Western world, which advocates not for grasping, but for complete surrender, which is very scary, isn't it? Yeah. But I think he would say that while it's true that knowledge can bring anxiety and stress, there are things that we could be doing to relieve that anxiety and stress if we wanted to, if we focused our energies there. The problem is that we're not doing that, right? We're split and stretched between all these other different activities and worries. Another thing that he says, and this is very commonsensical, is when it comes to matters of knowledge, you should rely on your feelings and your experiences. You shouldn't endlessly get lost in thought and rational analysis and abstract concepts, which is what philosophers love to do, right? Think of all the times that you've created stress and anxiety for yourself because you've overthought. And you were worried about making the right decision, right? Oh God, do I go to Point Park or do I go to this other place? Do I take this class or do I take this class? You're thinking through all of this stuff in your head, and you're like, oh God, I need to make the right decision. Oh, what is it? What's the right one? Epicurus would say, don't get lost in overthinking like that. Honestly, you can never have complete information. And you'll find the more that you think about things, the more that you try to make a right decision about anything in your life, is that you could always use infinite time. And the information to make the right decision is also infinite. You can never take in enough information. When the time comes, you just have to make a snap judgment, right? And then you kind of justify it to yourself by saying, oh yeah, I thought about it, and I considered all these different things, and all this stuff. He says, don't get lost in overanalyzing and overthinking everything. Maybe it'd be easier and better for you if you just trusted your gut more, you know? If you didn't endlessly worry about making the right decision all the time, it's just like, yeah, I'm going with that. That feels right. You know? In a lot of situations, you can trust your gut, right? It's protected you. Think of the times where you were, I don't know, maybe walking down the street, or you encountered some guy at a party, and something just told you, there's something off about this. Like, I shouldn't go that way, or I shouldn't talk to this person, right? The psychoanalysts would say that there are things that your subconscious mind picks up on and relays to you that you are not consciously aware of. You can trust those apparatuses to some degree, right? That bad feeling that you get, or the sense that something isn't right. So one of the things that we see emphasized in this view is we shouldn't endlessly get lost in logic and reason and abstract concepts, but we should trust our bodies and our experiences. It's very easy to heap pain and suffering, troubledness on ourselves by constantly using this thing we call a mind. You know, give it a rest. Don't endlessly think about things. There's one other thing, perhaps two, that I'd like to touch on before we end class. So far, we've been kind of looking at, well, very general advice, right, on how to live a life that isn't so much filled with pain and suffering as it is now. And Epicurus has said, well, you'll be able to alleviate a lot of your pain and suffering if you develop a more proper relationship with your own death, if you stop overthinking and overanalyzing so much, if you learn to find contentment and gratitude in the little things, right? Well, there are some other more specific things that you could do as well in order to not only bring pleasure to yourself, but avoid suffering. And it is something that Aristotle talked a lot about in his view, which was friendship. Cultivating friendship. Epicurus is going to say that the pleasurable life is one in which you have friends, and you hang out with them, and you do stuff with them. Friends are a boon. Honestly, Epicurus is like, maybe you might think of him as like one of the first hippies who like wanted to live in a commune with his buddies. That's what he advocates for here in sections 27 and 28. He says, a pleasurable life, a happy one, requires friendship. And he encourages us to work to develop and live in a community with our friends. Because that would be sweet. That would be awesome for us. Just think if you lived in a little village with all your friends. People who have similar values and life goals as you. That you can converse with. That you can shoot the shit with, right? Drink with. Eat food with. Wouldn't that be sick? So Epicurus is like, yeah, you should cultivate friendships. And maybe, if we push this idea far enough, we might come to the conclusion that we should be cultivating the kind of life in which we make that possible for ourselves and our friends. What kind of life do we live now? You go away off to college, right? Away from your high school friends, perhaps. And you don't get to see them very often. You move away from your parents. You move away from your cousins. You only see them at family gatherings. From your siblings. The demands of education and work pull us away from some of those meaningful relationships that we've cultivated the last 18 years, right? Do you like that? Does that make you happy? If not, there are things that you could do in order to reconnect and get closer with those people again. You don't have to go live and work in some place on the opposite side of the country as your family. Unless you want to, you can do whatever you want. I think Epicurus would look around today at the kind of atomized societies that we have, with everybody living and going to work in their own boxes, as disconcerting, as probably causing a lot of pain and suffering and anxiety for us. Insofar as we're not surrounded by the people that make our lives meaningful, that are able to support and love us and see us through hard times. Communities are great for us because if we live near or with our friends, we're able to share in awesome experiences with them, learn from them, get their perspectives on our issues so that we can solve them better, more easily. They're good in general for helping to achieve our psychological goals, right? If you're surrounded by people who love you, who support you, you're going to feel a sense of security and peace, right? And, although we don't have to worry too much about this now, he was thinking that if you lived in a community with your friends, that also provide you physical security. Why? You got people who got your back. All right? You get another commune coming in to invade and take your stuff. Your friends are there, right? They're like, don't worry, we got you. We're going to fight them off. Again, we don't have to worry too much about that today, but, you are still somewhat concerned with your own safety, and friends make you safer, right, when you are around them. So one of the big things that he tries to emphasize is that a happy, fulfilled life is one that has friendship in it. And friendship has a prominent place in that life. Does anybody find his description of this reasonable and desirable? Would you like to live in a commune with your friends? Or no? You're like, oh, I don't know. I think it sounds pretty sweet, right? Provided you can make it work. It's kind of difficult nowadays to do this, but it's not impossible. And so friendships are good for us because they give us opportunities to learn and grow. They help us achieve our physical and psychological needs. And they just provide for us meaningful and pleasurable experiences. In other words, we might say, friendships are good for us. And they are pleasurable insofar as they supply us with those pleasurable experiences, those memories, right? And insofar as having friends it helps us stave off those anxieties and those worries and those fears that we have. Finally, he ends this piece broadly by talking about justice and law. Let's see if you can predict what he's going to say. Is it going to be better for you to be a just person or an unjust person? If you had to guess. Should you go breaking the laws and stealing everybody's shit? What do you think? I see some shaking of heads. How's that going to work out for you? Probably not great, right? You're going to have people coming after you. You're going to have people wanting to arrest you and punish you. So there is utility in treating others justly. Not only, again, do we receive some sort of pleasure from doing good and nice things, but it's also critical that we treat ourselves justly. We could all improve our relationships with ourselves, right? It has been said numerous times that we are our own worst enemies, our own worst critics. We do things to ourselves that we would not do to our friends. We say things to ourselves that we would not say to our friends. We allow ourselves to get away with things that we might not allow our friends to get away with, right? Whether that's foregoing sleep, eating a really crappy diet, going out with that guy you shouldn't, sending that text that you shouldn't. How you think of and treat yourself, too. I don't think it's a stretch to say that due to the kind of society that we live in, with social media and all this crap, that a lot of people have tortured relationships with themselves. And that they're not treating themselves justly. They're not showing themselves the gratitude and the patience and the kindness that they would show other human beings. If this is ringing true for you at all, reflect on the ways that you could change how you think of and speak to and treat yourself. Are you causing yourself a lot of anxiety and suffering and troubledness because of these thoughts, because of these ideas that you have about yourself? The unrealistic standards or expectations that you are holding yourself to? Doing injustice to others and ourselves produces anxiety and pain and suffering. insofar as Epicurus says we should try to avoid suffering and troubledness, he would say, look, there are probably ways that we could fix our relationships with ourselves in order to live a happier life. This is nothing new, right? This is something that you've probably heard 30 times from your therapist already, or any self-help video that you see on YouTube, right? In general, he says, when looking out socially, we should seek to construct just laws, to live by them, and provide for ourselves and others. Not only is this going to be good for us and it'll make us feel good, it'll be good for other people. This way of socially thinking and living, he says, will lead to the most agreeable life with other people. So perhaps we should not seek discord and conflict with those around us, but maybe empathy and compromise. I'm not sure. That'll be for you to decide. Wrapping up, Epicurus says, living a contentful life is not that hard. You don't need all this crap to be happy. All that you really need to do is learn to find pleasure in the little things, give up chasing these artificial needs and desires that have been conditioned within you, and try to avoid as much pain and suffering as you can. If you do that, you're going to live a happy life, a fulfilled life. So what do you all think of this view, now that it's all on the table? Do you like this view? Do you like its prioritization of earthly things and the here and now? Does it ring true for you? What do you think? I want to hear your thoughts. Yes.
I think it's a generally agreeable view. There's nothing too radical with what he's saying compared to some of the other philosophies that we've looked at. Nothing particularly offensive, in my opinion, with what he's saying. I guess like the depth part might be like questionable, but I generally agree that we shouldn't really fear death in the way that we currently do. Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of like it? Makes sense? It kind of leaves a lot of wiggle room, right? Pretty general stuff. I mean, there are going to be different things that we find pleasurable, that we find enjoyable, that they would be following them, would be compatible on this view, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's not a very complex view, is it? It's rather straightforward. Now, the thing that you should reflect on is if he's right, that following or pursuing this kind of way of life is going to be ultimately fulfilling for you. Wolff argued that seeking a meaningful life in which we are engaged in some sort of activity of positive value is going to be necessary. Do you agree with that? Well, it's something to think on. On this view, there isn't much like overarching grand goals and dreams that you're really working towards, right? It's basically just, hey, enjoy the little things, avoid pain, achieve some pleasure for yourself. Try living like it for a little while. Maybe you will be fulfilled. Maybe you won't know until you try. I don't know. Okay, any final questions, concerns? All right, I'll let you all go then. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving break. And I will see you on Wednesday.